Good morning. Good morning, and welcome to season 9 of Gather for Her. This is a special conversation. If you've been around Gather for Her for a while, you're like, wait a minute, where's the braid? Well, I'm really happy that I am here with Leezá, which I'm going to introduce properly in just a moment, because I get some time with you, Leezá, and with you, our listeners, to dive into the core work that is Leezá's work in the world, and why she is coming here to work with Powerhouse in the Amplify program. I love these kinds of immersive conversations with just the two of us. I feel spoiled that I get to have this time with you, Leezá. I'm Tina O. For those of you who don't know me, I am your moderator of the two of us, and I'm grateful to be connecting with all of you here from Naquelaquam, also known as Bowen Island, BC, Canada, on the soil originally named as Turtle Island and now known as the continent of North America. I'm grateful to rest my head, to play and co-create on the traditional, unceded, and ancestral territories, land, and home to the Squamish people. Gather for Her invites you to be part of our co-created conversation with global leaders, change makers, and social impactors, and it's brought to you by Powerhouse and produced by Regen Media. And at Powerhouse, we walk beside leaders to amplify their change work as they walk their path of whole leadership, guided by relational leadership practices and Indigenous wisdom. Our impact media producer is Regen Media, who invites us to take the power of media into our own hands by supporting stories that heal, regenerate, uplift, and transform. And every 2 weeks, we're here live on LinkedIn and followed by a private interactive wisdom circle held in our community of practice called the Leader Path. And we do that because this conversation is emergent in nature, and there's going to be some concepts that show up that really we're not going to have all the time we need to really unpack them. And we want to invite you into those conversations. So while this conversation is Leezá and I and all of you in the chat, we invite you to join us next week in our community of practice on the Leader Path, where we can unpack all of this together. So as I mentioned, there's a live piece to this. So we invite you to introduce yourself in the chat in the way that feels good for you. Say hello, let us know where you're connecting in from, where you're grateful to tune in from. And if that's new to you, we invite you to allow yourself to be awkward and practice, because relational leadership is that. It's a practice of letting go of some of the hierarchical structures of the way we understand how to relate and start to relate in a circle, which is going to be awkward. There's going to be some pauses. There's going to be I don't even know that we know how to relate in a come as you are way. And that's what we're doing here. So I invite you to soften your heart and grow and co-create with us as we grow into this world that we're living into. So let's begin. I'm going to introduce Leezá. I'm just going to read her bio here, and then I'll introduce you in a more relational way, Leezá, how I know you. Leezá is an honored mother and committed community leader. Leezá has been a heart-based thought leader for over 20 years in over 35 countries. As an expert in relational leadership, connected communication, and sustainable conflict resolution, she guides corporations, teams, executives, and state representatives in recognizing their value, design, vision-based roadmaps, to recognizing their value and design vision-based roadmaps to achieve extraordinary results. Leezá helps people to be who they really are, which transforms everything that they do. Leezá's work is rooted in the genius of non-judgment. I can't wait to jump into that. And in honoring the innate and untouched value of all beings, including ourselves. Her strategic thinking and practical tools help individuals and organizations gain clarity amid confusion, simplify structures out of complexity, and transform tension into ease and confidence. We're honored to have recently welcomed Leezá as one of our Powerhouse Amplify coaches as well. And so that's a bit of your bio, Leezá. But one of the things I also love to do is introduce people on how they've impacted me. So from that lens, I just want to welcome you into this space, into this conversation. And for all of our listeners and our audience today, what I want you to know about Leezá is that I invite you to lean in to her words, because her words have an experience of her heart. And I know if you can tune into that, and the beautiful thing about you, Leezá, that I experience is that I do experience your open heart space first. You feel like a warm shoulder
Mm.
to lean into. And just being in your presence, I can hear my own wisdom, if you will. So it's like leaning into you allows me to lean into me. And I deeply appreciate you. And you said this thing once that I want our listeners to hear. And it's what attached me to you right away. I'm like, oh, I need to know her and I need to have her in the house. We need her in the house. And it was when we talked about the complexity of gathering around a circle from all the different indigeneity pieces that we come from, all the stories of that, of all that we are, and how do we find this oneness in our individuation. And what you offered to all of us was that the timbre of a drum, the sound of a drum can sound different from different parts of the world, but the resonance is the same. And I was like, that, what you just said. So thank you for bringing that to our gathering and welcome. And I invite you to fill in any gaps you might have in your introduction or corrections of anything I may have said that I got wrong. Yeah.
No, and thank you. I really appreciate the heartfulness of that introduction, and I'm grateful to be joining you and really honored to reside on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Multnomah, Kalapuya, and Clackamas nations here, also known as Portland, Oregon. And I so love that way of introducing ourselves, of where we are and how we're connected to this earth, because I find that that is how we connect to ourselves. And so I just appreciate that opportunity to enter that way. And yes, it's a joy to be here. My first encounter with the braid with Gather for Her, I felt like I came home. It's like, oh, these are people that I can relate to. Like, I belong here, right? And not that I haven't belonged in other places, but I always have had this sense of differentness, or I don't know, just something slightly unfamiliar in the familiarity. And when I gather here, there is no barrier. It just feels like there is that oneness, that, as you say, that drum's resonance. It's like, oh, there it is in all the different facets. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, let's get right to it. We've invited you to join us on the Amplify path because of the way that you lead and your expertise in relational leadership. So our first question is, what does relational leadership mean to you? I just give you the floor.
Mm-hmm. I love that question. It makes me smile because so often over the years, before I even had the term relational leadership, there was courageous leadership and whole person leadership and heart-centered leadership. And I love the term, the phrasing of relational leadership, because it defines really what my definition has been. And so when I work with leaders, and about, I don't know, maybe through the first or second session, they kind of lean in and they say, are you sure this is leadership coaching? And it's like, well, why do you say that? Well, because it's so much about me. Yeah, that's right. And so my definition of leadership and relational leadership is first being in connection, in relation with yourself, with that spirit that lives you, that highest place that you know when you're there. It's like, oh, there it is. And from that place then, to connect with and relate to another person, knowing that they have that within them, even if they're not acting that way, they're not even aware of it perhaps. But just like that resonance, when we relate to other people from that place within ourselves to that place within them, it vibrates. And then when we're both there, then to invite them along to whatever it is that we're doing together, whatever the objective is, or the project, or the mission, what have you. But now we're in this together. And so for me, that's leadership. There's nothing hierarchical about it. It's absolutely interwoven. I was going to say circular, but it's circular in its flow, yet interwoven in its expression, if you will.
Mm. Beautiful. Like three thoughts popped at the same time. The first thought that popped was when in Powerhouse, when we talk about relational leadership, we seem to have moved in. This comes from Christina Benti, but like there's relationship to self is like the first, like that's the core circle. Then relationship to each other, which you just brought, right? And then the relationship to all.
Mhm.
And we what is used a lot these days, certainly in Canada, as with Truth and Reconciliation, is to move at the speed of safety,
Mhm.
move at the speed, of together and connection. And that's what comes up for me with the work, that the way you just described that. And then the second part that came up was like, oh, there, you said vibration. I went, oh my gosh, are we meeting? Are we meeting at the vibration of the drum? Is that what that is? That resonance? You're such an interesting person because I don't know if it's right brain, left brain. We say right brain, left brain, creative and more linear, but I also think it's like spiritual, if you will, and tangible.
Mhm.
And you occupy that space so beautifully. Can you speak a little bit to that in your work with individuals, perhaps?
I'm believing you're asking me to speak to just that last piece.
Yeah. Sorry, I threw like three things at you. Yeah, the last piece, right? The
Well,
spiritual.
it's all kind of connected, and so I'll just weave through it
Right.
and go from there. I appreciate the three pieces or the three
Mm,
expressions of relationship that you've expressed. My experience of it is relating to self and all
mm,
allows me to relate to other. So I don't feel like I can touch or reach another unless I am connected to all, because that is the resonance, that is the connectivity that allows us to touch one another. And so, and I also really appreciate you speaking about we travel at the speed of safety.
mm,
So I'm going to share with you. Well, it's a little bit connected to relational leadership, but also about this heart space. Yes.
mm,
So three small vignettes come to me. There's a story or a book called The Continuum Concept, written by Jean Liedloff. She was a journalist. She's passed now. She traveled the world doing stories, and she ended up moving to selling all of her belongings. She was British, and moving to South America
mm,
to live with the Yokwana Nation, and that is a semi-nomadic culture, very removed, we would say remote, primitive, if you want to put a word on it. I would say they're more civilized than most of the places that I've been.
mm,
And so, for a variety of different reasons, she moved there because of the way that they were. They were happy, they were content, they were peaceful, but in a very real way. It wasn't giddy, it wasn't put on.
mm,
And she wanted to know what's the difference? Like, what is the texture of their being with one another that creates that in themselves and in their community? And she recognized it's how they are with their children. And so that was really the foundation of how I've raised my children, and really the backdrop of what's now also known as connected parenting. And so there's one story in there that for me really portrays relational leadership and being in community or being in any kind of group relationship. And that is that, so they have elders, they have people of varying disabilities, they have small children, and they carry their children until the children can walk on their own, right? So they have no other way than to just carry the small infants. But then when they can walk, they walk. So being semi-nomadic, when they travel from place to place, so they pick up and they move their entire village, the entire group only walks as fast as the slowest person.
mm,
And now, even when we say the word
mm,
slow, I would invite the listeners to think about what comes up for you, like being the slowest, right? All the history of school or being in a group and not getting it, all those things that come up for us. And there's two aspects that are really impactful a lot in that situation, but two that really come out for me. The first one is the respect on behalf of the community of those whose abilities are different. They're not better or worse. They're just different than the norm, than the center of that graph of speed of walking. And so the group accommodates to the fringes rather than to the center of that graph, if you will.
Right.
And then I think about the children or the elders or the people that are different. Like, can you imagine just as a child growing up and not having that sense that you have to hurry, you need to keep up, right? And that your whole environment is congruent with just who you are. There's nowhere to get to, there's nothing to change. You just are. And when they are that way, then there's the source of happiness and contentment because there's no friction, there's no disturbance to that state of being. So when I think about that and then transcribe that into our other experiences, and I'm going to circle back to the left brain, right brain, or emotional and intellectual here in a bit. If we look at some comparisons, let's say in school, right? We're told to hurry up, don't dawdle. You know, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you getting it? Where you may be sitting there really trying to cognate, like you're doing as fast as you can, but for whatever reason, maybe you're a visual learner and it's auditory. Maybe you're an auditory learner and it's in a picture, like, right? So the onus is on the teacher, the educator, to create an environment that everybody can learn rather than insisting that certain people catch up with where the bulk of the graph is. Or I think when I was a little girl, when we would walk anywhere, do you remember? I don't know, maybe you don't, but it was like I'm being pulled forward, and my legs were half as long, right? So they're pedaling as fast as they can go, and everybody else is going, and I'm being dragged behind. In that sense of I can't go faster, and then I have to run to try and keep up, right? So that whole feeling of, in German they have a word hetzen, which is it's hurry, but it's also mixed with this bit of anxiety of not being able to make it, right? And then that all translates into our experience as leaders, right? In a team, in a board meeting, on a project, whatever it is, of come on, get on board. What's wrong with you? Didn't you get the memo? Quote unquote, or literally, right? Rather than the leader saying, so we shared this information, we had this deadline, I'm curious, why didn't you make it? Or what is it about that's not working for you? So being in relationship with that person in order to have the common experience be pleasurable and successful, if you want to use that word, for everybody. Mm-hmm. So those pictures and that emotional integration from I have to be different and I have to hurry up and I have to whatever, it's taken like decades for me to come to the point of, you know what, this is about as fast as I can go. And I could go faster if it feels good to me and if I'm going to help everybody and it's in my capacity right now. But is that necessary? And why is fast the standard of preference? Right?
Wow. Yeah. That I was trying to imagine, I was trying to put in my body, imagine an experience of life without the word hurry in it. Mm. And I I don't even know. Like, I don't even know. What a fascinating gift to explore in our lives and in our leadership and with our teams, like you said, in our boardrooms, in our strategic planning, in all of it. It's interesting that children came up because you're probably not privy to this yet, but in so many of the season 9 episodes of Gather, there's been a theme of children that has come through. And so there must be some teaching for us this season around that. What you just shared to me, I tracked over to your the genius of non-judgment, and they may or may not be related in a really linear way, but I went, if hurry's not there, if I'm not worried about being judged, then I'm going to lead differently, and I'm going to show up when somebody else is leading differently as well. I wonder if you might share a little bit more with us about the genius of non-judgment.
Absolutely. And I'd like to start out by saying I was probably one of the most angry, judgmental people you would have come across. And I grew up in a home of violence, and also, so my dad was incredibly violent. My mom was on the autistic spectrum, but also clinically paranoid. So I really, I won a winner's card in the family. And I say that both with tongue in cheek and also literally, because they were incredibly good humans that were doing their best. And because I could access that humanity in them, I learned I am who I am today and do the work I do because of that. So I was of the opinion, my parents were also racist in that they felt that there was supremacy. Like that wasn't even a belief, it was a fact in their minds and how we were raised. And so as a young person, I ended up moving over to Europe, specifically to Germany, which has an interesting history unto itself. And they're not particularly open to foreigners. And so I'm coming from an environment where, middle class, educated, the world was all okay in that narrow experience that I had as a young person. And then I end up in a culture that's really not okay with anything that's not German, was my experience. Not to disparage the Germans, but that was my experience. And I was even told by a number of people, you won't ever be accepted here, but you're one of the better ones. So that also within the discrimination, there was a hierarchy, right? And that was a really important experience for me, because then what I had the gift of being able to do was to look back to not only my history, but to the society that I had come from and say, wow, maybe that's not what I thought it was. And I had to start reframing. And then I read the book, it was later, but it also had a profound effect on me, from Barack Obama, Dreams from My Father. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's like multiple Americas. Like there's not just the one that I thought, okay, this is America. It's like, wow, there's all of this. And so all these walls within myself, all of these dissections and categories just started crumbling. And then I was left with, okay, so if there are no rules, there's no hierarchy, there's none of that, then how do we orient? Like, what do we do with that? And I was very, very lucky. I spent many years studying at a place called the Option Institute that has a sister organization of the Autism Treatment Center of America. And they work with people on the autistic spectrum, completely based in non-judgment. And the results are literally miraculous. So my coaching initiation and studies in Socratic dialogue and also non-judgment began there. And I deepened that. And for me, it was such a critical tool to differentiate facts from my experience of them. And facts are very specific. Facts being, and this is kind of the analytical, which you were talking about earlier, kind of a little bit more the anatomical aspect of my work. So facts are things that we can measure, like the temperature is 20 degrees, or the light is on, your hair is brown, I'm wearing earrings, right? So there are things that our senses can commonly agree upon. Although if we want to go into metaphysics, even that's questionable, but just for the conversation, we're going to stay in this realm for today. So those are the facts. Now, I might have an experience of 20 degrees as being cold, right? I'm not going to say Celsius or Fahrenheit here. And you might experience it as warm. Well, which one is right? Which one is good or bad? Well, we can't. How can you say that? So the fact can be correct or incorrect. Maybe it's 20.3 degrees. That we may be able to figure out if it's on point. But our experience of it is totally valid because it's personal. It's our experience and our perception. So when we can break down situations, it really is a practice, and say, what's the fact? Like, what's the fact? Now, what's my experience of that? And I give credence to my experience. And that's what most people, what I've heard from a lot of clients, well, my partner left me and I know I shouldn't be upset. I know I should be able to just deal with this, right? Well, the fact is the person decided not to be married anymore. Whatever your experience of that is valid. Some people may be relieved. Other people may be devastated. Whatever you're feeling is valid. And so to give credence to that is really a healing process, and allows us then to move forward into, how do I want to perceive it? Okay, well, maybe I feel like I'm devastated because I believe it's the worst thing that could have happened to me, but what if it's the best thing that happened? Like, what if I just don't understand? What if my vision isn't broad enough to understand how this could be the best for all of us? I just can't see it that way. then my response is going to be different. I might feel more at ease. I might have more hope for the future. I might not cling as desperately, or whatever it may be. So that anatomy of breaking down the facts can be correct or incorrect or on point, but our experience and our perception and our desires are always valid. And then people usually say, so, okay, so great. We know we take the judgment out. So what do we orient against? What do we do? Right? Well, what do you want? And that's where it gets tricky, because we have been trained in the colonized world to not trust what we want. And I will have to say, often our wants are so distorted from what's really aligned with our values, because we're not in touch with ourselves. So a clarification of process of really identifying, what do I value? And from that place, what do I want? What do I want to move toward? That's all part of that genius of non-judgment for me.
There's so much here. You just offered like some real paradigm shifts. Right? I call those etch-a-sketch moments. I don't know. Did you ever have an etch-a-sketch when you were a kid?
I love a sketch.
Right? And there might be viewers who are young and younger and don't have it. No. So an etch-a-sketch was this red box that had it's like it had sand. It didn't have sand. It had graphite, and you could turn these dials and you would draw things. And then if you shook it, it would erase. And so it's like the etch-a-sketch moment in our brain is like, shake your head a moment and let the reimagining begins. There were some beautiful pieces in here. I'm curious how this works into your coaching.
That's excellent. So I'll give you an example of a client of mine. She's I work a lot with female leaders, which I appreciate. I appreciate all genders, but I guess I can relate to the female because of the background that I had. Anyway, so this was one of my clients, and she works in a large tech industry company that a lot of people may know. And I was called in to work with her by the organization. She was having challenges, they said, getting her team organized and just working in general. And so we started working together, and I did my intake and looked at what she wanted to accomplish and where the difficulties were and so forth. But the longer that we worked, it became very clear that the communication, the environment that she was working in really was not healthy. And so she started talking about things that were happening specifically with her boss. And if I were to give it a word, I would say his behavior was bullying. Okay. Male boss, female director. He was the vice president. And so she was trying to figure out how to deal with this. So we worked with multiple communication tools, including, impactful communication. And I also started working with her on non-judgment. And every time she would come with a scenario, I would ask her, what are the facts? Like, let's talk about the facts. Well, I prepared for this presentation, and he rejected it. And I said, so if you prepared for it, that's something you know, but rejection is actually an interpretation. It's a judgment. So what exactly did he do? Well, he said it wasn't on point. Okay, he said it wasn't on point. And so then the next meeting, he started yelling. Well, what exactly happened? Well, he raised his voice and he said, you don't know what you're talking about, right? So I helped her start to groom her listening for not what she's interpreting of what's going on, but what's actually going on as far as people would commonly concur with. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm very aware when I say that people can have different perceptions of the facts, but we're getting as narrow as humans can with the dynamics that go on between us. So through time, she started realizing that his behavior was not conducive to healthy relating. And so she started judging him. And so what I did was I broke down, there's another tool that I use, the control point model of what lens are you using to look at those facts. And so when we talked about that, she gave me this whole picture of how she envisions him. And I said, what if it's this way? What if he grew up in an environment where his voice wasn't heard? where if he talked, he would get punished, where he never had an opportunity to be in charge. And he was the youngest of 5 children, and he got lost in the fray. And what if the only way that he got heard was by yelling? I didn't know this man. I don't know that that's his story at all. I'm guessing it isn't in any way. But what was interesting about that is that she said, wow, it never occurred to me that he wasn't the way I saw him. So the genius of non-judgment and using that control point model, understanding it's the lens through which we see things, really is our liberation. Because then, and it doesn't even have to be that picture of him, just to know that whatever he's doing has nothing to do with me. And one of the things that I think has been so valuable at teaching for me is when somebody says something to you, they're telling you something about themselves, right? So if he says, you haven't prepared for this, where she spent 3 weeks, almost, all waking hours working on it. He says, you haven't prepared for this. That's telling us something about his perspective. Maybe he doesn't feel prepared. Maybe he doesn't think that she can do the job. Maybe he never feels prepared. So to start listening from a different paradigm and believing that there are different perspectives through which one can read things is incredibly liberating. And that's how for me, leadership coaching is so impactful, which is usually when the people say, is this leadership coaching? Are you sure about that? And then when we get farther down the road, their teams change, they're on point, they have their development plans for their direct reports, they're meeting their objectives, it all comes together because their structure, their scaffolding of how they operate is clear now and clean for them and powerful.
So here's how I'm receiving what you've offered as a tool. And I think, so first off, I hear the tools of this. What I'm hearing is that the genius of it is the heart-centered space, which is where the intangible of relationship, which is whether it's energetic connection or however people want to interpret that. The way I call it is getting in the room with people. Yeah. When I'm in the room and we're in the same room and we don't have to define that room, we can just feel it. I'm like, okay, that's relationship. Is that kind of like, that's my interpretation. Is that kind of where it goes?
It is. So for me, heart-centered, I don't stumble over that word, but it feels almost too limiting because for me, I come back to the resonance of the drum, right? We're all in that space together. And so then I have the opportunity when I'm judging, when I'm knowing I'm right, when I'm self-righteous, I have contracted to such a point, I can't feel myself. I can't feel the resonance. I can't feel you. When that falls away, when I'm not clinging to judging, when I'm not having to know, when I can trust unfolding and I can trust the fabric, the life force, then I can listen and I can feel and I can sense. And then from that place, as you're saying, we're in the room together, then curiosity comes like, well, why is your voice louder than it was 5 minutes ago? Or I'm curious why you're saying I haven't prepared, because for 2 weeks I have. So what am I doing that's coming across as unprepared to you? And not out of defensiveness and not out of trying to pin somebody to the wall, but really in that spaciousness of, why am I over here having this experience? And I'm sensing you're having such a different one. I'd like to understand, because we're here together in the room. I'd like to know everything in the room so that we together can move forward with what's in the room, or at least clarify what's there for you and what's there for me.
I love this. Especially there's something about the word spacious that really opened up for me, because of course, as you know, Powerhouse, we champion change makers. We are the hands at their back, and Amplify is 2 parts. It's the amplification of the change maker on the inside, and it's the amplification of their work on the outside. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that comes up a lot on the leader path and in our community is the remembering that being in the space of social impact or change making is like getting up every morning. And right now, it's like going out to the jungle and cutting our way through, and because we're literally building the airplane as we're flying it.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels to me like this, again, goes back to what the visual that I offered in the beginning is like leaning into you is like an opportunity to lean into me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
just, yeah, I'm just curious, like even more, because I feel like we've done a really good job of illuminating the tool and maybe even the impact of it around spaciousness and such. I'm really curious about when you're coaching people, what happens? I mean, I know you gave us some of the, things start to work and such, but I'm curious about the change maker or the person themselves. Like what starts to happen for them as they start embodying this spaciousness?
I love that question. So I'm reminded again of a different client, also a woman, also director, and she struggled. Actually, she had reported her boss to the HR department for gender discrimination, and they called me in order to avoid litigation. And they wanted to fix her, right? That's always, and that's generally when people calling consultants or coaches, they see, oh, there's a problem, let's fix it or them, right? And it's always systemic. And in my experience, it's about perspective. I mean, I'm also a certified mediator. So one of the things I love about mediation is presenting people's perspective so that the other person can hear it. And that moment when they're like, that's what you've been talking, oh, it's just like, that's almost better than chocolate. Well, maybe it's even better than chocolate. It's a close call. And so, I was called in. I worked with this woman, and the first time she laid it out. She's of first generation of color here in this country in the United States, and her boss was Latin American, and so they had cultural stuff going on also, right,
Mm.
as well as the gender thing and the hierarchical thing. So I said to her, first session, what's your ideal outcome? Like from our coaching together, because she didn't know me from Adam. What would you like to have? She said, to get the hell away from him. And I said, okay, that's one option. What's another option? There isn't one. I said, okay, I'm going to offer one just for consideration. What if you could come to a place within yourself that is so comfortable and so much at ease that you absolutely are fine working with him and he doesn't have to change at all? She leans forward. Never going to happen. I said, okay, that's fine. So we worked together, and about 6 months later, I get a phone call from the director of the HR department who had hired me. And I pick up the phone, hello, and she said, she didn't even introduce herself. She said, what did you do to Jane? I said, I don't know. What happened to Jane? She said, she's a completely different person. She wouldn't even go on Zoom. She wouldn't turn on her camera on Zoom. Her team meetings were 5 minutes. She'd give orders and walk out of the room. She said her conflict with her boss was so extreme, as you know, it was supposed to come to litigation. She said she's a completely different person. She's on Zoom. She's relaxed. Her team loves to go to meetings. And in addition to that, she created such an amazing relationship with her boss that they have now promoted her as one of his peers, and they are working together. And she said, so what did you do? I said, actually, I really didn't do anything. But what happened was, I love that imagery of leaning in on, into someone's shoulder, is she leaned into herself. Like she recognized she's valuable. She doesn't need anybody to tell her that. We went back into some experiences she'd had in the past. It was based on this belief system, right? Something happens. We create a belief about it and think that's the truth. That's the fact. That's not the fact, right? She had some experiences growing up as a young girl in the first generation in this country. And her conclusion of those facts were, I'm not worthy of anything. And when she recognized that that's the filter that everything was coming through, every conversation she had at work, every task she was given, all came through, I'm not worthy, I'm not worthy, I'm not worthy, I'm not worthy. And I didn't shift that. She did by looking at it. She was like, wow, of course I'm worthy. How can I not be worthy? How can a person not be worthy? And when she got that, her whole world shifted. her relationships, the one with her boss, litigation was no longer in all of that. So, and now I've totally forgotten what your question was.
Oh, you answered it. You got it. Yeah, no, you got it. And you know what else just happened is something else just dropped in for me. So in the very beginning, when we were talking about the 3 circles, like relationship to self, relationship to each other, relationship to all, and you brought your perspective forward, which is relationship to self and relationship to all. And I was like, we skipped the second step. What? And my brain was like, what does that even mean? Because I was in my Western practiced mind, I tend to think in linear patterns. So, because how long have we been told put your own oxygen mask on first before you put on somebody else's, which makes good sense. But what I'm experiencing you say is understand what it feels like to breathe your own air, and then remember that there's air to breathe. And in that, you'll then be able to, the relationship to other takes care of itself.
Absolutely. Beautifully said, Tina. Beautifully said. Absolutely.
That changes everything.
I know.
And what I recognize is that, because of course, in the work that I do in the world, as I listen to people, I'm really listening for the realm of the realm they live in. And not all of us live in the realm. Like some of us live in more linear patterns. And I've never been able to articulate to someone who lives in more of the world that you live in, like that lens of I, all, other, rather than I, other, all. And you beautifully gave me a way to relate that I didn't have. Wow, that was magnificent.
I'd like to share a story, and I don't do this often, but it calls to me now with what you're talking about, because it really is the genesis of everything for me. And given that our ancestors behind and in front of and all around influence us, live with us, I feel. I come back to my father, and this is a personal story, but it impacts everything. And we didn't have a word for PTSD in the 1960s when I grew up. And he came back from Vietnam. He was a combat pilot, but he didn't fly into combat. He flew cargo planes, and he flew into combat zones to pick up wounded soldiers and dead soldiers. And this was at a time also right after my sister had died of leukemia. So there was a lot of tragedy in our family. And he came back from war to a country that, really accused him. I remember going to kindergarten being told my father was a murderer. I didn't know what that word meant. And so, and no right and wrong in all of that, but it was so. And so it wasn't until years later that I understood that this man was, first of all, traumatized from the death of his daughter, and then also from the war, which now we call PTSD, right? There was no word for that. And so he brought all that rage and terror and pain into our lives, and we got that. So over the years, because of, I don't know, my kids would call my Winnie Pooh-ness, just this kind of very innocent, not knowing way about me, I just adored this man. Like I adored him. And it wasn't that I didn't see the rage, but it just didn't feel like it was part of him. It didn't feel like it was part of his soul, the fabric of who he was, even though I was a subject of the violence. So over the years, I kept saying to him, Dad, we're going to have a relationship. And I don't know what you're talking about. We have one. I was like, no, So I kept working, and I did my work and so forth. So 1 year, years later, my children were small. We went out for a meal, and he said, and he was very, very engaged and smart, and especially political. And we were at very opposite ends of the political spectrum. And he said, you never talk to me. And I said, well, there's reasons for that. Like there wasn't a lot of space for understanding, and you told me I didn't know what I was talking about, so there wasn't a reason for me to talk. And he said, well, why don't you go ahead and share and I'll listen. Tell me about the current administration, how you see it. And I was like, oh boy, that's not going to go very well. So I said, I tell you what I'll do, Dad. I will tell you how I see the world. And very similar to what you just explained. And I said, and my deep belief is that everybody is good. And yet the horrors that people can inflict on themselves and other people come from how far away they have gotten to remembering their goodness. The farther away they get from that, the more impactful the horrors are that they can inflict. And so I shared this with him, and he was quiet for a minute. And then he looked at me and he said something that absolutely shifted everything for me. And this is why I do the work I do. He said, "I wish I had the courage to see the world the way you do." And this man was powerful. And I said, "Dad, you do. My gosh." I said, "You absolutely do." And he stood up for the first time since I was a little girl in 40 years. He took my hand and he walked hand in hand with me around this lake back to our car. And from that point on, Tina, my experience of my father is that he found a way to forgive himself for whatever. And the rest of his life was so beautiful and so connected, and our relationship became so much more. I really ended up having a father in the later part of my life, which he could never offer before. So what you're pointing at, that air that there is to breathe is the connective tissue of all of us. And so when we lean into that, when we remember it, when we allow it, when we trust it, it will connect us. It can't not.
Whew. Wow. I'm going to have to sit with this conversation for a while after. Because again, in the genius of you and why we're so thrilled that you're part of the Amplify team is that, we have Amplify. We're all gifted in different ways, and some of us are really gifted in the impact space. Like, this is the goal, let's go get the goal and move, like performance coaching, right?
Mhm.
That element. And what you bring so beautifully is support in the complexity of the unnameable.
Mm.
It's like the art, it's the beingness.
Yeah.
And I hear that one of the ways you get there is through this understanding of perspective. But make no mistake, like, your father taking your hand was a transformational internal shift.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was powerful. And so when people come and say, "I can't deal with this boss," or "I have to get rid of this employee," or "I can't live with my wife anymore," or my son's driven me to the brink of I won't have to anything to do with him anymore." I hear these stories and I understand the pain and I understand the frustration and the sense of it can't work. So the only way is out. I have a personal experience and conviction that there are other ways. And I think that my conviction of that is actually what is helpful to people more than the tools that I bring to the table or anything else that I bring.
Mm. I wonder, we're coming up, we have like another 5-10 minutes left, but I want to touch on, if we can, and maybe we'll do more of this in our next Gather conversation where we have the braid. But I want to pull in, you've designed a program, I think it's called Core, and it came from you. And, in the work that I do in the world, in my belief system, we've been entrusted with something to give the world. And because this came through you, I suspect it's part of what's been entrusted to you. And I just want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about this core work that you do in the world.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I would second that statement that we have not only one thing, but many things to give, but there is one that is the spear point that kind of pierces the world around us. So Core, the program I think you're referring to, is the Core of Female Leadership. And that is a program, it's a team program for female leaders within organizations that I work with. I also do that in cohorts of women that come together, not being in one organization, and I call that Woman Undaunted. But the Core program is based on, and I have to thank my son for this, because when I moved across the world from Europe over to North America, the name for my company was already taken. The one that I had started over there, I couldn't register over here. So I had to find a different name. And so in conversation with my son, he said to me, "Mama, you do so many different things. What's like one thing that unifies it all?" And I said, "I don't think there's one thing." I said, there's really four. Like there's clarity, being really clear about what's in front of me without any filters. And then ownership, being authentic and transparent and owning 100% of my participation in whatever it is. And then resolution. So being committed to resolving conflict or misunderstandings. It doesn't mean it has to work out that way, but your commitment to resolving. And then excellence, being willing, as we spoke all the way at the beginning, of resonating with that highest place within yourself and in others. And he said, oh, that's CORE. And I said, I know. And he said, no, Mama, it's an acronym, CORE. And I was like, really? He said, yeah, CORE. It's like, oh my gosh, that's so perfect. And so that gave birth to the name of my company, Core Success, because success in the way that I define it, it is who we are. It is not what we achieve. We already are that we so want to be. And so when I work with women in organizations and do the core of female leadership, what I'm doing is helping them to identify the value that they're bringing to the table every single day in every single situation. And I have so many female leaders at the top of their game, CEOs, large company owners. They're right there, and they something will happen. They're like, well, I just have a great team. It's like, you do. And what was your participation in that? Well, I just empowered my people. I understand that. How did you do that? Right? So to keep bringing that mirror back in front of them and saying, and look at yourself, and look at yourself. And at some point they're like, wow, because we haven't been taught that. And it's the same for pick a minority, right? Pick a race, and whether it's the indigenous people, the people of color, people with special needs, even the elderly, right? Women, people that aren't mainstream patriarchal that this society has come to know, live with what they believe is the fact of, I'm not good enough. I don't match up. And if we change that lens, if we really look at it and say, well, why did you conclude that you're not good enough when your team didn't deliver on time? Well, actually, I guess I did well. I did exactly what. And so to keep coming back to that doesn't make you better than, but it makes you wonderful. And so owning your wonderfulness doesn't take it away from anybody else. It just grows it, I believe.
I love that. Owning your wonderfulness doesn't take away from anybody else. It just grows it. That's fantastic. Wow. Well, we're about to wrap up, and what a beautiful way to close this conversation. But we always do a round of what are we leaving with today? Actually, you know what? Nope. I'm going to say one more thing. One more question. Yes. And then we'll do the wrap up, which is, it goes back to the relational leadership, because that's what we're exploring right now in season 9. And the last question that we had sent to you just to kind of ruminate on is, what do you think is the most important thing right now in relational leadership? What would you say is the most important thing to practice, or, to bring into relational leadership?
Transparency. I think that we can say what we want to about the things that have gone down and the different leaders on the planet that have mucked things up incredibly. Mm. One of the gifts I think that they have brought is they have made the muck so transparent, because they've just been out there. It's like, I'm going to be angry and mean and self-righteous and judgmental and discriminatory and racist and all these things. And there it is, blah. And that has been a gift, because now it's blah right in front of us. Now we're working with it, right? We don't have all these niceties and programs and clothing on top, like the emperor without the clothes, right? It's just transparent. And so I feel that in leadership, being able to say, listen, folks, we are recreating. We're not even recreating, we are creating, because we can't go backwards. And we're not regenerating, we are generating. Like this is new. And this is how I see it happening. This is what I'm bringing to the table. What are you bringing to the table? And I think that it can be a tremendous disservice to our organizations, to our teams, to come in presenting as though we know. I know how we're going to get out of this. I know what you need to do. And so I think that that's the tremendous gift in all crises, is that the the genesis of growth and transformation is in the crisis. And so the very fact that all of the disarray and the crumbling is taking place is giving birth to leaders, change makers, to have the opportunity to say, I have no idea, so let's do it together. And that transparency is powerful. That's what's going to lead us really forward in a completely different future than we can imagine. It's the only way.
And then I think with this beautiful perspective that you've offered us, we can be in transparently in a whole way when we remember there's air to breathe, right? In that all
Yes
space. And I would suggest that that's the practice we don't know how to do yet. It goes back to your core work. And might we be able to live transparently when we're grounded in that core space?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Well said.
Poof. Beautiful. So much. Wow. Thank you, Leezá. Yeah, let's do a round of the two of us. Let's volleyball back and forth. Yeah, what are we leaving with? And I guess I'll go first, actually. I'll give you the last word. What just popped into my mind right now was actually when I said the volleyball thing. And I was the recognition of the divisiveness of our world right now, or the experience of that divisiveness. I'm not saying the world is divisive. I'm saying that there's an experience right now of that divisiveness. And I think what I'm leaving with is, wow, is the insight again of that perspective shift of I, like relationship to self and relationship to all. Because in that space, there can't be any divisiveness, because it's not about relationship to other. It's actually relationship to all. So that's what I'm leaving with. I don't even know what that means for me yet, but that is going to haunt me in a beautiful way for a while until it sorts out how I live into that. And that's what I'm leaving with today. Yeah. Thank you, Leezá.
Oh, I love that. Well, I'm going to start my celebration and that's what's present for me is celebration of you, Tina. You have consistently, from the moment I met you, given of yourself in such a delightful way and always in such an honoring way of others. And then you weave groups and conversations with such love and humor and depth and delight. And so I celebrate that. And I celebrate every time that I come into a group and you're facilitating. It's like, oh, this is going to be fun and everything else. So celebration, and also celebration for Powerhouse and for the leader path, and the opportunity to work with people who are committed with their whole being to really up-leveling us all by living their light in the world. I mean, what could be more amazing to be a part of than that? So I just feel so grateful and just excited. So celebration.
Oh, yay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to close us now for all of our listeners with just a little bit of information and just an invitation. Thank you for joining us in this really beautiful, just the two of us conversation with Leezá and I, which is new on Gather for Her. And we are probably going to be changing it up a little bit on Gather, where we have the braid, but I think we're going to have some of our Amplify coaches come in sometimes and host Gather too. So the braid's going to expand. So thank you for being with us on this journey of co-creation together in Powerhouse and of Gather. These are co-created conversations with global leaders, change makers, and social impactors. And this conversation, because you're probably going to want to watch it again, has been recorded. So yeah, you can watch it here on LinkedIn, but it'll also be on our YouTube channel. And again, we also have it in a podcast that's been renamed as The How for Her, which you can find on Spotify or all the other places that you listen. We want to thank Regen Media and, of course, all the people in Powerhouse, because Gather for Her is hosted by Powerhouse, where we walk beside leaders to amplify their change work as they walk their path of whole leadership, guided by relational leadership practices and Indigenous wisdom. And to our impact media producer and sister company, Regen Media, who reminds us that we can take the power of media into our own hands when we support stories that heal, regenerate, uplift, and transform. And also want to thank the hands that are back at Powerhouse and Regen, our digital media storytellers, Zoe Gray, Madeline Archibald, and Willow Smith. And to my co-hosts who aren't here in person today, but know that they are here in spirit, which is the Braid of Powerhouse, Charlene Sanjenko, Christina Benti, Sharon Marshall, and me. And to all of you, our listeners, and our community of changemakers, leaders, and social impactors, thank you for walking with yourself in your change work. And thank you for walking with us in co-creation of the world that we're living in together. I want you to know that you're always welcome here live on LinkedIn when we gather every 2 weeks, and as well an invitation to join us on the Leader Path next week, where we unpack all of this wisdom in a much more in-depth way, because we need more time. There's a lot of juicy stuff in here. So please join us. And Leezá, just again, thank you to you for being with us and sharing your wisdom and heart. What a pleasure.
My joy. Thank you, Tina.
All right, everybody. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. And until then, just be loved and supported in your change work. Hands at your back.